Hello, my name is Owen, and welcome back to my Malazan Book of the Fallen reread. We're on House of Chains. It's been a minute since one of these videos, and for those of you that are new, for those of you that don't know what's going on, this is one of my favorite series of all time. So I have a whole playlist of videos going through part by part of each of these books on a reread and exploring the deepness, the themes of these books, because if you haven't read them, they're absolutely amazing. This is a spoiler video for House of Chains, so if you haven't read this book yet, get out of here. If you haven't read the series before, start reading the series and then watch my videos along with me. I'm going to spoil part one of this book. I'm not going to go any further than part one. That way, if you're reading along with me, I'm not going to spoil ahead, right? And jumping straight into it, this is a very, very unique part of the Malazan series. And I have some thoughts about it, but I think it's some of the most thought-provoking, like, outside of the text, I think it's the most thought-provoking discussion in terms of the actual choices that Steven Erikson makes in this specific part. But before we get into the actual part, let's talk about the prologue, guys. Let's jump right into the prologue. We are introduced to a new character, Troll Sengar, and he's a part of this different people. And at this point, I don't believe they even mentioned who the people are. We know that they have a connection to water, and we know that Troll is not in a very good spot, and he's about to be like ritually shamed and excommunicated from his own people before he drowns to death, and it's by his own brother. We learn that, and then it's just the scene of him about to be, they call it the shorning, and at the end, it's implied that he's going to break loose, and he says, "Nature will not abide," by what his brother is doing. What is that about? I know, but it's just a very ominous, it's a very like slightly badass introduction to this new character, and it's another new set of people, guys, which is the theme of the beginning of this book, because part one is unique in the sense, for the first time in Malazan history, we're sticking with one character for an entire part, for an entire 260 page part, which is the size of an entire book. We have an entire book with just one character, and that character is the very controversial Karsa Orlong. Dare I say, the most controversial character in the entire series. Maybe one of the most controversial characters in all of epic fantasy. And why is it controversial? Because Steven Erikson was really cooking with this one, guys. And I'm going to say, before I talk about my thoughts are very heavily tied in terms of the character of Karsa. They're tied to my original reread, haven't read throughout the whole series. I think that's very important in the crafting of it. However, it's also very tied to Steven Erikson wrote an essay specifically about Karsa Orlong, specifically about like the controversial nature and then what he was trying to do with this character, which I genuinely think is a must read. And there's no spoilers for the rest of the series. I think after you read part one of House of Chains, you can read Karsa Orlong's essay, written by Steven Erikson himself. But it's controversial because Karsa Orlong is a barbarian type character, and he does dastardly things. He kills innocent people. He rapes innocent people. He pillages. He is abusive. He is verbally abusive to the people that he cares about, to his friends, to his dad. He's just all around an evil dude when we meet him. And then we spend time with him, and he's complex, though. He does all these things that obviously are horrible, taboo, criminal things in our society. But he represents this like kind of anti-civilization, right? Because he meets civilization. He meets the slaves that civilization has in this world. He meets like the imprisonment, and then he's like this liberator. He hates slavery, right? Good, yeah, you hate slavery. But what about all the other stuff you do, Karsa Orlong? You know what I mean? What about how like dastardly you are outside of that? And it's partly like a growth point, because we meet him, he's just bloodthirsty, he wants to kill as many people as possible. And then by the end of this part, he kind of mellows out, and he has a more nuanced view of just talking. Before he's like, "I don't talk, I only kill." By then he's like, "Ooh, Torvald Num, what an interesting conversation you bring up here." So he has a little bit of a growth here. And when I read this part for the first time, I'll admit, I didn't hate Karsa. I could kind of see that Erikson was going for like a character evolution arc, but I do think it's weird. It's weird, guys. It's weird to stick with a character in this Malazan universe for that long. But we'll get into the actual structure stuff. I want to stick on Karsa before I get too distracted. But basically, what Steven Erikson says in this essay is he wanted to challenge the trope of the barbarian from the North in fantasy literature, right? Because he said that a lot of times this barbarian character is used as the anti-civilization character, as like a sign of like, guys, civilization is bad. We need to go back to our roots, like live free, live wild. He's the liberator, right? He's like nature. He's like unbound by like oppression and stuff like that because he lives outside the bounds of civilization. So like by him coming into civilization and by making civilization the bad guys, the slavers, it's kind of a commentary on that. And Steven Erikson agrees that there are some aspects of civilization that are oppressive and that need to be liberated from. However, he hates the idea that this is the only perspective that should be considered because civilization is, I think he says in his essay, civilization is what gives us leisure time to read big books about things for fun, right? So he also uses Karsa as a commentary on the barbarians themselves. Like these people aren't, if you were like, if you did all these things, if you murdered, you pillaged, you raped, at what point, if you're reading a character that would do that as the antithesis to civilization, do we draw the line and say, wait a minute, civilization's bad, I thought. So it's kind of like a counterpoint there, and it's a commentary on both of those things at the same time, which is why, so it's almost like he purposely made him controversial. He's controversial in the sense that he's presented purposely as this bad character to civilization, while also commenting that there is aspects of civilization that need to be torn down, perhaps. So he acts as like both of those at once. But because he does such evil things, some people are like, why am I supposed to connect with this character? Why am I supposed to sit with this character for such a long period of time when we just witness him doing despicable things for most of his run in this book? And I completely see that. I did not like Karsa for the first 200 pages, and you're really not supposed to. But like I said, there is a growth there, and there's even moments in the beginning when he's just his pure barbarian self that he shows very complex layers where he'll like, I think one of the greatest characters in this part is Bayroth, one of his companions, who immediately is very witty, very communicative, and kind of like bites back verbally at Karsa's ideology. Along with Karsa's dad, he kind of does the same thing. But you get the sense that while Karsa is very brutal, he's very like animalistic in his violence and his like determination. He's like, all right, well, we're going to kill these people. We're just going to kill them. He's also incredibly smart. And sometimes Bayroth will throw something at him and then Karsa will just throw it right back. So we get the sense he's not just a mindless brute. He's a mindful brute, which is unique. And because he gets caught in a loop in the middle section here of him, his hubris giving him a bad time. He runs into something he shouldn't have ran into, and he gets his butt beat by the Forkol Sail. That he's like, oh well, I'll just free this ancient beast. Get the crap beat out of him and get one of your friends permanently crippled, like their brain is leaking goo. That's what you did, Karsa. Then he goes to he sees a city and says, oh, I could take a whole city by myself. He can't take a whole city by himself. He gets Bayroth killed. He gets imprisoned. He gets enslaved. And it's just this endless cycle of, oh, I'm so cool, I'm so cool, I'm so cool. Oh, this bad thing and this bad thing and this bad thing. It's just an endless cycle of him getting in worse and worse situations as a way to kind of humble him, but also kind of like hone his like mental state. And it's incredibly unique, guys. Because he really does get beat up for the majority of this part, but he never wavers. One thing I like that Erikson says in the essay as well is that Karsa is an outward character, not an inward character, and which is very, very rare for this series as well. Another unique thing that the Malazan does, because you get characters like Quick Ben, who are so internal, who are mostly internal, and we never know as a reader what they're thinking, what they're planning, because they never say anything, or even Erikson doesn't even let us inside their heads to hear what their thoughts are, almost ever. So he's like Quickben's a very inward character. We don't really know what he's about, what he's going for. Versus Karsa is completely outward. He always says what he thinks. Even as those thoughts are evolving, we know they're evolving because he's saying that they're evolving. The whole beginning is he's following the faces in the rock. These gods who are really, I don't know if it outwardly says it, but it's basically Talanomas in a rock, right? And they are influencing him, and it's also implied that they are employees of the crippled god, because they mention the Tisti door and how they say, oh, that's not our plan, but we got our own plan. And we know the crippled god and Tisti door are connected, even though we haven't met the Tisti door yet officially, or have we? So in that sense, Karsa Orlong is following the faces in the rock, therefore the crippled god. And there's even points where he says, like, the Urgol is definitely guiding my actions here, and I'm completely aware of that. He tells Torvald Nam, he says, I don't necessarily believe in them anymore. However, I'm going to follow them because I want answers now. I'm going to go where they want me to go, just so I can get an answer, and I'm going to do whatever I want. And you got to respect a character like that who's always going to do exactly what he wants, no matter how many times that sometimes maybe you should just collaborate a little bit. He's not going to do that. And because he's slowly becoming more nuanced and more aware of the consequences of his actions, he just becomes a smarter and more dangerous, more badass character potentially. And I think it's very interesting. I can see completely why people are turned off by this character beginning and not be able to get over the first 100 pages. But I don't know. I think it was just a very unique way to do it, a unique way to explore a barbarian culture and a barbarian character, but one who is incredibly intelligent, and see him adapt to civilization and still fight against civilization in a lot of ways at the same time, because that's really Karsa's main driving force is he says, like, I will not be chained, I will not be enslaved, which harkens back, guys, to the whole theme of Gardens of the Moon that we talked about being chained to something, and how Paran's whole thing was like, I will not be chained to a god, and I will not let the hounds be chained to Dragnipur. Karsa is introduced as this antithesis to civilization who constantly says, I will not be chained, which makes us make the connection in our heads, guys, or at least I think it should, that civilization and chaining are inherently linked in some ways, right? And then also that Karsa is a thematic character in a lot of ways. Because if an entire theme of book one is about chaining and unchaining, and we have this character who immediately fits into that mold while being extraordinarily complex, while being from a culture outside of civilization, and he's important enough that Erikson feels like he needs to give him a whole part. He's the thematic character, guys, and he's extraordinarily important. And just by giving him so much screen time in the beginning of this book, Erikson is flashing the signaling light that maybe this character is one of the most important characters in the series. And maybe we should keep an eye out for him. And it's also, before I get into my thoughts, because I do have thoughts about this part as well. Excuse me. I just want to say that, some of my other favorite characters in this part are Torvald Nam, who obviously is the cousin of Rallick Nam, that we know from Gardens of the Moon as well. He's another counterpart to Bairoth, but I think he's important as well because he's important in Karsa's growth, because he acts as a friend to Karsa. He saves Karsa's life a lot of times, but he is from civilization. And some would say maybe he's from maybe a little bit of the darker side of civilization a little bit, because he is a criminal, he's a thief, he's kind of a scam artist, his family participates in like ransoms, you know what I mean? Not the nicest guy, however, he is quite enjoyable, and I think he's a nice guy. He's a nice guy to Karsa, at least. So he kind of presents Karsa that he could be friends with people outside of the Teblor and someone from inside civilization. And finally, the last person it leads him to is Leomin, who I think is kind of the third act of people that Karsa interacts with. Leomin doesn't take Karsa's crap either. He kind of challenges a little bit, and he represents, obviously, the Shaikh in the rebellion, and the rebellion against the Malazan Empire, which in Karsa's mind right now is like the antithesis of civilization. So kind of like completes his arc where it's like friend with people like for barbarian, but challenges me. Torval Nam challenges me, but friend from civilization. Leomin, friend, challenges me to challenge civilization while also being a form of civilization. You know what I mean? So Leomin himself is civilization, but he's encouraging Karsa to challenge the establishment, in this case, the Malazan Empire. And obviously, by connecting into Leomin, we should have the flashing bells to connect him back to Toblakai, which Leomin reminds him at the end of this part, said, hey, your name's not Teblor, you guys are the Toblakai. And we know from Deadhouse Gates, Toblakai is a character. So the character that hates Heberic is Karsa Orlong. It's the same guy. So we bring him back there, which makes his introduction in Deadhouse Gates so much more valuable, I think, on a reread. Because the first time I read his introduction as Toblakai, I'm like, who is this character and why is he so angry? Well, you'd be angry too if you were caught in 7 different forms of slavery and then over the course of 120 pages, maybe. However, that's all I got to say about Karsa, and Karsa is the entire part. However, I will say, I do think, obviously it's unique that he spent a whole part on one character. Does it work in the Malazan in series? And I know part of the essay, Erickson says as well, he kind of did that as like a, oh, you guys think I can't do a single, I can't spend an exterior amount of time on one character? Watch this. He even says that in his essay. I do think it's interesting in terms of pacing of the series. I'm almost glad that I took a little bit of a break from the series before jumping into House of Chains, because like I said before I started reading it, this was probably my least favorite book in the series. I think it's paced a lot slower than a lot of the other books in the series. I think it was harder for me to speed through, and I immediately encountered that issue again, just because we're stuck with one character. And I think it's interesting. I think from a thematic element, I think from a reread perspective, it's so much more interesting. But I think it's a struggle to rewire your brain to commit to this one character and then stick with them for a whole 260 pages, right? And I think, well, it doesn't happen again, guys, just as a spoiler, but I think that this series, especially if you're 3 books into it, is benefited by the constant changing of perspectives, the interweaving of storylines thematically, leading to plot intertwining, like a convergence. So I think that it's, as a first-time reader, that's what I was like hit the brakes by, is the changing of pace, the changing of style kind of threw me off, and I want to know basically, did that affect you guys at all? Did you like being stuck with one character, or did that throw you off a little bit? Because I feel like when I read it the first time, it threw me off, but because I had so much more to dig into this time, I did enjoy a little bit more, and I like Karsa. I like spending time with Karsa. I think reading his introduction again after having read the whole series was a little bit more rewarding, but I want to hear what you guys thought about just this change of style, this change of pace, and whether or not you thought it was interesting, whether or not you thought it was beneficial, whether or not you wished he would have done more of it. But regardless, we're into House of Chains, guys. House of Chains. The crippled god's house. Karsa refused to be chained. What's going to happen? Sounds like Karsa's going to have a big part to play. Be sure to like and subscribe if you like the video and you want to see more like it in the future. I got a lot of subscribers recently, and I know a lot of them are Malazan fans. So I appreciate you guys sticking around, and I will be making more of these in the future. You don't have to like and subscribe. All right, I'll be making them anyway. Thanks for sticking around.